Xerxes the Great was born in 518 BC, and so his timeline matches up with that of Herodotus. But that's not it. Herodotus wrote about Xerxes and how he used Egyptians in his army. Not only this, but Xerxes was a master at war. And of course, whenever he conquered a nation, he would put them into his army. And when these people who had been enforced or forced to join the army, he would then write about them in detail and draw them in detail. Herodotus also wrote about the Egyptians that joined Xerxes' army, and this is what he had to say. He also ranged the Macedonians and those that dwelt about the Thessaly against the Athenians, these, the most considerable of the nations, that were arranged under the Mardonians, have been named, and which were the most distinguished and most account. Yet there were also mixed with them men of other nations, Phrygians, Thracians, Mysians, Panians, Ethiopians, and others, and among them those of Ethiopians and Egyptians who are called Hermotybians and Calasyrians, armed with swords, who are the only Egyptians that are warriors. These, while he was still at Phalaris, he took from on board the ships, they being marines, for the Egyptians were not arrayed with the land forces that came with Xerxes to Athens. One of the best movies ever made about history, even though it's fictional, and it's fictional based on a fictional story, is 300. And in 300, you'll notice that there are black people who appear all over the place, even though the movie is based on a Persian army versus a Greek army. And the question is, why are there black people in the Persian army? The answer, they came from Egypt. They are a mix of Ethiopian and Egyptian people, and they resemble a type of person that was trained in war in Egypt and then sent to fight for the Persians. This type of person was trained in Egypt before the Persians had taken over, when the Nubians had taken over as well. And of course, in the army of Xerxes, there were multiple people. And so when he died, they were commissioned a giant wall depicting the races of man that fell under his control. The Persians, Medians, Elamites, Parthians, Aryans, Bactrians, Sogdians, Chorasmians, Zarangians, Aracosians, Satagidians, Gandarians, Hindush, Saka Humvagians, Sagatiga Shardians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Arabs, Egyptians, Armenians, Cappadocians, Lydians, Ionians, Saka, Skurdians, Ionians, Libyans, and Ethiopians. If you notice, the entire table of races that are depicted on here, which is very interesting, the only two that don't have facial hair are the Ethiopians and the Egyptians. Their faces seem to depict a more Asiatic look to them, but this is merely because of shoddy artisanship. But you can tell with certain features that are put around them that they're not the same as the other Asiatics and Europeans depicted. And when I say Asiatic, I mean as far as India as well. But before Xerxes, there was Darius the Great, and Darius the Great wrote in his inscriptions, Darius the Great, King of Kings, King of Countries, son of Hyspaestus, an Achaemenian king. Darius says, "This is the kingdom which I hold from the Sake who are beyond Sogdia to Cush and of Sind," which is the old name for India. By the way, when he says Cush, he means the kingdom of Cush, which at his time was including Egypt as well, because the Cushites had taken over Egypt in a reversal in this dynasty. Before Darius, there was Bardia. Before Bardia, there was Cambyses II. Before Cambyses, there was Cyrus II. Before Cyrus, there was Cambyses I. Before Cambyses, there was Cyrus I. This is a stele depicting Usarhaddin, the king of the Assyrians, dominating Taharka's son, Ushankuru. As you can see, he has a rope in one hand and basically a leash around the neck of Ushankuru, and he's bowing down by his feet. These images show the absolute destruction that the Assyrians brought onto the Egyptians, both on land and by sea. And feeling overwhelmed, Taharka, the king of Egypt, ran away, and his family was captured, and so was his wife. You can imagine what they did to them. But there is a writing about what Ushankuru did, and it says, "When Ea, the great Lord, in order to show to the peoples the immensity of my mighty deeds, made my deeds powerful over the kings of the four quarters and exalted my name. When he caused my hands to bear a stern scepter for the annihilation of my foes. The land sinned against Ea. They treated him with contempt. They rebelled to rob, to plunder, to extend the border of Assyria. They filled my hands. After Ar and the great gods, my Lord commanded me to march over distant roads, wearying mountains and mighty sands, thirsty regions with trusting heart. I marched into safety of Taharka, king of Egypt and Cush, the accursed of the great Godhead. From Ishapuri to Memphis, his royal city, 15 days. March the ground was covered daily without cessation. I slew multitude of his men. I struck him 5 times with the point of my javelin, with wounds with no recovery. Memphis, his royal city, in half a day with mines, tunnels, assaults. I besieged, I captured, I destroyed, I devastated, I burned with fire. His queen, his harem, Ushanhuru, his heir, and the rest of his sons and daughters, his property and his goods, horses, cattle, and sheep, and countless number, I carried off to Ar. The root of Cush I tore up out of Egypt, and not one in it escaped submission to me. Over all Egypt I appointed a new kings, viceroys, governors, commanders, overseers, and scribes. Offering and fixed dues I established for Ar and the great God for all time. My royal tribute and tax yearly without ceasing I imposed upon them. I had a stele made with my name inscribed, and on it I had written the glory and valor of Ea, my lord, my mighty deeds. Shown here are some positive depictions of Egyptians. This plaque shows the depiction of a somewhat Egyptian looking person, and it says, shown here is a beardless man figure, probably a youth, wearing an elaborate headdress. His hair resembles Egyptian wigs, and his headdress incorporates Egyptian motifs, including the central elements called an atif. And that's only but one of these ivory made statuettes that depict Egyptians. And as you can see, there is no difference between Nubians and Egyptians in these descriptions or portrayals.